Large language models like ChatGPT are deciding which startups get seen and which disappear. But the old traditional playbook of what works for SEO does not work for large language model SEO. And in this video, we'll break down how a $3 billion company, Verscell, has changed their SEO. Verscell just recently posted this on how they're adapting SEO for large language models and AI search. And there are a lot of really great nuggets that are actionable that you can take in order to learn how you can show up in large language models. Now, what's interesting in this is that there is not a direct correlation of increase in organic traffic. And in fact, there might be a decrease in organic traffic, but what is actually coming through is an increase in conversions. So we can see here in this post that they're talking about that there are 0-click answers. So for somebody, one of their potential customers who might be searching for something like, how do I write this API request? The answer is actually pulled up automatically in AI. So Verscell might not actually be seeing an increase in its organic traffic. However, what it is seeing is an increase in conversions, especially those that are coming from AI, ChatGPT in this case. So it says right here, ChatGPT now refers 10% of Verscell signups. Before, just last month, it was half that. And then 6 months ago, it was 1% of signups. So we're seeing a 10x increase in ChatGPT driven signups, and that's all from their LLM SEO strategy so that they're showing up more. So let's dig into what some of the takeaways are that they shared. An interesting learning that Verscell shares is that LLMs reward clear, deep, structured explanations. So it says that owning a concept with depth, structuring for retrieval, earning citations, and keeping it fresh and reliable. So the takeaway here is that AI cares about how clearly and completely you answer a concept, and that models look for the best definition and not the most optimized version. Moreover, it's not that it will pull from the highest ranking page. And what's also interesting that reinforces this is a recent SEMrush study on 500 high-ranking digital marketing blogs. And what it found is that a majority of the sites that were cited in LLMs were actually in positions 21 plus, which means that it's not about organic ranking. There isn't a direct correlation of the highest ranking pages for a specific search query are included in that LLM citation, but it's actually more about the specificity of the answer as it relates to what the question is. And what can you do about this? When you're creating your post, when you're identifying what the search query that you're targeting for that page, or what the cluster of questions that you're answering, think about how you're actually going to structure that. So in the introduction, make it very specific. And then you're also going to structure the body with clear H2s, tables, and bullets. So for example, if you're writing about how to write an API request, you're going to include that in the title, so the H1, in the slug, so how to write an API request, and then in the H2s, how to write an API request for something. And then you're going to answer in a way that is semantically very natural language. So it's not about a long bloated answer, but something that's quick that an LLM could digest and also replicate for the answer to include in this AI search overview. So the second interesting point from Verscell is that being first or being the best means that you can own the concept. So LLMs favor the first or the clearest explanation of the concept. If you're early, your version may become the default, and if you're not, you should become the definitive one by creating the best content for that specific concept. Moreover, what's also interesting is that you cannot just replicate something that is already out there. There has to be this notion of information gain, that you are adding something new to this topic. And that is where you are publishing definitive evidence-based source. So when you think about what Google's EEAT, experience, expertise, authority, trustworthiness, all of this is important in creating the evidence-based source and something that is definitive. So you are going to avoid the generic summaries because that is just informational. That's nothing specific to what an LLM would cite. So here are some really great takeaways when you're focusing on how to create the definitive source. So once you've found your idea, then you're going to avoid the generic summaries, but instead focus on substance because LLMs infer authority from depth, and this is coming from Verscell. So you're going to include your proprietary data, so original data, your expert quotes, or your customer case studies, stuff that cannot be replicated by a competitor or just anybody else that an LLM could create and somebody else could publish. So you really want to focus on what your unique angle is and that unique perspective or story, data that you can share to bring to the table and bring this information game. And the third interesting point from Verscell is that you want to focus on the foundations, the technical foundations, so that it is easy for a machine to understand, ingest, and replicate your content in an AI overview or a large language model answer. So what does that mean? It means using the right headers, so consistent terminology and clean heading hierarchies, your H1s, your H2s, your H3s, including the right schema. So that might be your FAQ or your how-to schema. You want to use semantic elements where possible, so that includes callouts, glossary terms, nav sections, clear class names. And remember, when people are using these large language models, it's more of a voice text or long tail query. So it's no longer short search terms, but you're really kind of trying to optimize for long tail questions that somebody might actually naturally ask. You want to confirm indexability in Bing and Google. The main takeaway here is just to make it as easy as possible for a LLM bot, a large language model bot, to take in your information and understand it and use it when appropriate. The fourth point that's really interesting that Verscell shared is the value of social media, or the value of what communities are saying about you, because large language models learn from the web. So there are certain sites that you might want to focus on, assuming that your customers are going to be there. So if it is a developer-based product like Verscell, then it might be GitHub that's interesting, or Reddit, Twitter, it doesn't matter. But focus on, as it notes here, high signal indexable channels. So Reddit, GitHub, Hacker News, X, LinkedIn. And maybe if you've seen in ChatGPT, a LinkedIn post might surface and it doesn't necessarily have a lot of engagement or a lot of views, but it answers a specific search query. I've seen this many times. And this just underscores the value of social media platforms and where other pockets of your potential customers are talking about you. And that informs the large language models. That same SEMrush study interestingly noted that Quora is actually the most cited website in Google AI overviews. Reddit was a second. So you can see here what the most cited domains in the Google AI overviews. So Quora, Reddit, LinkedIn, YouTube. These are all social media sites where you can contribute to the conversation. So if you do find you can take your existing posts or your existing content from elsewhere, repurpose them and publish them on these sites. That is one way that you are getting the large language models to interpret and understand what you are about and what the community is saying about you. The fifth interesting point that Verscell shared is the value of fresh content. So the large language models favor recent content. So if you are keeping your content updated consistently, it signals both users and models that your information can be trusted. So what does that mean? You can make sure that there are no 404s, that you are updating your last mod tag, you're refreshing stale or outdated content, so that you are continuing to signal to the large language models that you are keeping content updated and then therefore increasing the trust value. This LLM SEO, answer engine optimization, generative engine optimization, all of this is developing so fast, and the best practices, what actually works, is still being developed. I don't know if anybody actually knows, but I've started to put together a checklist of some of these things, some of the stuff that Verscell shared, as well as other things that I've learned, just so that I can have a checklist as I'm putting out content and working with brands. This is what we need to do in order to put ourselves in the best position so that we're appearing in these answer engine optimization, or these answer engines, these LLMs. And it starts with the technical crawlability. So we've covered this. Server-side rendering pages. Avoid the JavaScript where a LLM cannot actually pull the content of the site. So make sure that the bots can access your content easily. Make sure that the pages are clearly structured with your header tags and your semantic HTML, so your lists, your tables. Add schema markups. So your FAQ, your how-to, all of the schema, make sure that you have that added properly, and confirm that you have your site indexed by both Google and Bing. When you're actually creating the content, we want to focus on question-driven content. So remember, Google's AI mode works in the fan-out technique, which is that one question that you're asking the AI mode will actually be developed into 50 or 100 other sub-questions. So you want to, as best as possible, address that range of questions. So you're writing in natural language Q&A to answer the user's questions, and then just make it simple for the bot to understand what that answer is. So that's including the introductions and the structured answers. Go deep with original data and expertise. So that is your Google EAT, experience, expertise, authority, and trust. Try to include as much proprietary data, and then keeping it updated on a regular basis, because large language models will favor and trust content that is up to date and refreshed. Now, talking about external signals and authority, there is a value in how your brand, how your company or product is perceived in these social sites. So include as much as possible, and take your single idea and multi-purpose or repurpose for different platforms. You want to create linkable assets that people naturally reference. So it is easier now with, say, vibe coding tools, Lovable, Replit, Bolt, to create these assets, and ultimately building entity trust so you get into Google's knowledge graph via consistent citations and schema. And the last thing that is being developed is how are you actually going to measure and understand how these LLMs are mentioning, how often is your brand being mentioned, or what is your visibility in these large language models. So you can track this in Google Analytics or now Search Console, or you of course can do manual checks on different search queries to see what whether your competitors or your own site is being mentioned in these large language models. And the very last thing, but certainly very important, is including internal links. So you want to include sufficient internal links as an indication, especially to those pages that are important, the pillar pages or those bottom of funnel commercial focused pages. You want to include internal links too. So that is it. I think it's really important to take note from what Verscell is sharing. $3 billion company, and they are 10xing their conversions from ChatGPT in just 6 months. And I think what it boils down to ultimately is that if you are creating clear, structured, and content worth citing, then AI will be more likely to include that. But if you're creating content that is generic or outdated, or can be created by any competitor or large language model, then it's really important to focus on that so you don't get ignored and fade off into no man's land of the internet world. The main takeaway is maybe just find a few areas that you can focus on, that you can own, and create the content that only you can own, including your own experiences, perspectives, your customer case studies, your own data. If you're looking to create a strategy so that you can increase your visibility in large language models, click the link below. Or if you want to create the content on your own with AI, make sure to watch this next video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.